Imagine for a moment that I'm an aspiring video game developer. I have a choice ahead of me. Do I join a AAA studio at the forefront of the industry, blazing a trail for the future of gaming technology, or do I let my creative juices flow as an indie developer, making games that'll be adored by small but dedicated communities? Is neither an option? Okay, so clearly the industry is in a bit of a rough state right now. After the COVID-19 pandemic, market saturation is at an all-time high, and industry growth is on the decline. Xbox is buying up major publishers and falling behind in the console race, as per usual. The PS5 isn't getting any big titles anytime soon, as if they had any to begin with, and even Nintendo's output is slowing down, presumably in anticipation of the Switch 2, which is nowhere to be seen. And don't even get me started on the layoffs. Microsoft, EA, Embracer, Epic Games, Riot, all in all, over 10,000 jobs were lost in 2023. Either way, there are risks that need to be taken into account when searching for success in the gaming industry, and it's important for a developer to be aware of them. Let's talk about the different approaches. AAA studios are most often very established. They've historically offered more stability than indie development, but within the last year, there have been massive layoffs across multiple studios that throw job security into question. The engine developer Unity has laid off almost 3,000 people since January of last year. Most recently, as I'm recording this, Take-Two Interactive, the company behind GTA and 2K, laid off 5% of their workforce across all of their studios. So let's say you join a AAA studio and your job isn't in jeopardy. There's still a lot to take into account. AAAs are known for setting standards. Two examples of the rising standards last year were Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears of the Kingdom. Baldur's Gate was an extremely in-depth and carefully crafted RPG with multiple story paths, complete with fully voiced and motion captured performances, and Tears had what is perhaps the most seamless and versatile physics system ever in a video game, building on top of the foundation that Breath of the Wild laid with its chemistry interactions. It was even delayed for a year just to make sure it was all working right. Here's the catch though. These games are not only diamonds in the rough, they're also special cases. Larian launched Baldur's Gate in early access in 2020 and had a constant revenue stream before the official release, and Nintendo is the richest company in Japan. On top of that, the industry, despite seeing many more releases than it used to, is reaching a plateau in terms of fidelity, and the true innovators are few and far between, much more so than they used to be. These two games indirectly sparked controversy about whether or not the standards for AAA development should be raised. As a single developer, you have the opportunity to be a part of something that could change the industry forever, for the better, but that window is closing. While there are many successful AAA releases these days, there's a lot of microtransaction-ridden games-as-a-service garbage that tends to float to the top. Listen, I don't want to call out Destiny 2 in particular, but General Manager Justin Truman's comments about Bungie's company motto and the backlash his GDC talk received for it is indicative of the distaste that people have for the state of AAA gaming. If you're wondering about the motto, well, it used to say,
"We make games we want to play,"
but it was changed to,
"We create worlds that inspire friendship."
The same type of PR speak that a lot of people got sick of a long time ago. Oftentimes, developers are treated as an obstacle between the studio and their money, and being a part of a AAA studio can put a target on your back, not just from the higher-ups, but also from the community, who often tend to blame developers for problems that are out of their control. And on that note, let's talk about those problems. Higher-ups often impose strict deadlines on their teams, and this leads to extensive crunch, which is not only demoralizing to developers, but can also lead to games that are broken or unfinished on release. Luckily, crunch is being addressed, but it's just as much of a cultural issue as it is a management issue. It's not all doom and gloom for the AAA space, though. One of the other major benefits of AAA development is building up experience. The larger team size on a AAA game means that individual developers can focus on honing a specific skill set without having to worry about the other factors of game development. An environment artist doesn't also have to worry about character design, or even something like marketing if that's not something they have experience with. Those larger team sizes are also useful for networking purposes. Of course, on the flip side, this can create unprofessional hierarchies and limit creativity for devs who might want to flex that muscle. But it's not like you have to make your choice and then it's made and then you can never change it though. There are many indie developers that had experience working for larger studios and then broke off to start their own projects. If you watch my YouTube channel, you might know Rivals of Aether, which started as a solo project from former Microsoft dev Dan Fernacci. Well, Now we're on the cusp of Rivals 2's release from Aether Studios, helmed by the Dan himself and his Padawan, Trevor Youngblood. Most recently, Toys for Bob spun off of Activision to go indie, not too long after their acquisition by Microsoft. Heck, Steam wouldn't even exist today if it weren't for Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington breaking off from Microsoft to start Valve. Wait, why the heck is everyone leaving Microsoft? So then what about indie development? Well, it's far from risk-free. Wait, back up a second. If you watch my YouTube channel, you might know Rivals of Aether, which started as a solo project from former Microsoft dev Dan Fernacey. That's it. Working on a video about game dev for class, and I needed some examples of the pitfalls of indie development, and I just realized that the perfect example was someone I've talked about on my channel before. He was right under my nose the whole time. Thanks, Dan Fernacey. I'm a bad example. I've never made a mistake in my life. Huh. Well, back to the drawing board, I guess. Dan Fernacey and Aether Studios are actually really interesting to look at here, especially right now. In his latest annual blog post, he dives into the process of growing Aether Studios as a brand, as well as what's next for Rivals. As someone who's been following him since Rivals 1 was announced, I can personally say his timeline is an interesting one. He's overcome some of the biggest obstacles of indie development. Like I said earlier, Rivals 1 was a solo project from the start, and has slowly been building up a small but dedicated fan base. A lot of indies struggle to find success in such a crowded market, and while there are avenues to discoverability like Steam Next Fest, marketing is something that takes a lot of money and/or time, which a lot of solo devs don't have. You can't just release a demo or a trailer for your game with the snap of a finger. A lot of developers these days will just post gameplay clips on Twitter or TikTok. In the case of Rivals, it's a platform fighter, which at the time there weren't many of outside of the Super Smash Bros. Series, and it came around right around the launch of Smash 4, but at the same time, a lot of people were kind of sick of the direction the series was headed in. So it was definitely a right place, right time kind of situation. Over the years, the Rivals team has grown, and Aether Studios has launched multiple spin-offs. According to Dan, in game development of any size, just releasing projects, especially self-published ones, is a feat in its own right. Again, this is echoed by multiple other indies. Many indies have to rely on finding publishers who deal with marketing, and those outside relationships can be rocky depending on the developer and the publisher. Aether Studios is in a fortunate position because they can afford to self-publish all their projects, and notably, those specific projects were greenlit in an effort to grow Rivals and Aether Studios' brand recognition. Of course, one of the biggest and most obvious benefits of being an indie developer is having total creative freedom. They aren't motivated by profits like AAAs are. This means that individuality shines across the indie scene, and as a player, you really get to pick and choose which games to give your support to. Many indies are inspired by other games, but have some twist. For instance, Smash was really the first game that defined what a platform fighter was. The main appeal of Smash comes from its absolutely insane roster of characters and different IPs mixing together, which is a luxury that Dan never had. Rivals was inspired by that, but it's more focused on accessible competitive play and unique characters that fall into one of 4 elements with gimmicks that revolve around that element, while most Smash titles are mainly concerned with being a good party game above all else. But creative freedom comes at a cost. Simply put, game dev takes a lot of time. Rivals 1 is still receiving patches almost a decade on, and Rivals 2 has been an ongoing project since at least 2020, with plans to support the game for years to come following its launch. And on top of that, there are often unforeseen consequences to indie development that can stretch out timelines long past expected dates. This includes things like feature creep, but also world events like a global pandemic. And let's not forget about our friend Unity, who lost the trust of thousands of developers overnight when they announced that they would require their users to pay them a flat fee based on how many installs their software would get, and that it would also require them to pay for every install that they had ever had before. It wasn't a change directed at indies, but they were seen as collateral damage because a change of this magnitude had the possibility of bankrupting several smaller teams. Ultimately, Unity went into full damage control, but since then many devs have been urging people to switch engines if possible, which is no small feat. Rivals doesn't run on Unity, but it does run on GameMaker, and even switching from an older version of GameMaker to a newer version was a huge feat. That, on top of the game's netcode overhaul, combined with the pandemic, is the reason the game didn't launch on Switch until 3 years after its PC release. Of course, the other cost of indie development is the monetary cost. Especially with a team like Aether Studios, whose main bread and butter is live service titles, Time is money, and money is never an infinite resource. It was one thing back when Rivals 1 was a solo project, but the second time around, with a larger team and more mouths to feed, lots of indies turned to crowdfunding in order to keep a revenue stream going. Rivals 2 is no exception. Luckily, Rivals, as with most indies, was built on the backs of its community, meaning they had no problem reaching their Kickstarter goal. A first-time developer won't have the benefit of an established community though, and many will have to turn to publishers to find funding. Not to mention, no studio is safe from layoffs, unfortunately, and that includes Aether Studios, who had to delay the story mode for Rivals 2 in order to get the base game out the door by the end of 2024. At least it's not to fill the pockets of their shareholders. If this is the price we have to pay for the Subspace Emissary 2, then so be it. I think the biggest takeaway here is that game development is hard. If you're trying to get into the industry, know that it can be a years-long process that, while fulfilling, can take its toll at times, whether that's due to pressure from above, lack of preparedness, or anything in between. But it's through these struggles that we get to see these success stories. Stories like Baldur's Gate, Tears of the Kingdom, and even Rivals 2, which is on track to become one of the most successful titles in its genre. And none of these games happened overnight. By the way, if you get a chance, give Dan's Medium blog post a read. There's some great documentation on the indie experience from a first-hand account, and not to mention, they're just fascinating reads, especially as a Rivals fan. I would also recommend checking out Masahiro Sakurai's YouTube channel if you want some more generalized AAA insights from the director of the Smash series. But that's all I've got for now. Good luck, aspiring game developer.